My name's Ben. Welcome to Tech Junction. Thanks for coming to the event today. I'll be presenting on Relax, which is Civo's own AI assistant. So yeah, thanks for coming. So first of all, a quick agenda. So I'll be kind of like covering a few things, three main things. The first being what are like AI in 2025. So mainly kind of like what trends and developments here at Civo we're seeing and we think are significant in the AI space this year. I want to also discuss things like the latest advancements in LLMs, of course, but also kind of things like data privacy, sovereignty, and AI democratization that we all feel very passionately about here at Civo. I want to kind of like persuade you or kind of discuss why these matter for both kind of like individuals, but also small businesses and large enterprises as well. After discussing that, we'll do a bit of a deep dive into Relax and the product, kind of what it offers and how these link to these ideas of data privacy and sovereignty. As well as kind of like showing you the capabilities. So Relax is powered by Meta Llama models. It's exceptional at things like sentiment analysis, code generation, and all the things you might expect from LLMs out there at the minute. And then going from there, we'll go into a bit of a live demo. I'm going to kind of show like the user interface, show kind of its simplicity, but also like the wealth of features that it offers and the power of Relax, but also its API capabilities as well. And then taking that a bit further, I'm going to show the API using with some of these out-of-the-box tools that you might have seen out there at the minute. So I'm going to show a demo with Klein. It's going to be driven by the Llama Maverick model, which is the main model that Relax hosts at the minute. So first of all, I kind of want to review the direction of AI and LLMs and what we're seeing this year in 2025. So the first key kind of statistic or fact that I want to give you that is particularly striking is this, which is from Gartner, which is by 2026, 80% of enterprises will have generative AI, APIs, and models in production. I think the key part of that is up 75% in the past 3 years, which is 5% in 2023. And basically, what does this mean? And like, how has this really dictated the evolution of the AI space this year? I think mainly the point that I'm trying to get across here is that kind of enterprises are clearly dictating where the AI space is going. And you can see that from a wealth of factors. However, these are 4 that I've kind of drawn out that I think are the most significant. So the first thing that we've seen change recently is this kind of like strong urge from people to use advanced reasoning models. As you can imagine, in kind of like as the adoption of AI kind of grows, also the regulation of AI grows, and it's becoming more and more important for people to not only use more sophisticated models, but understand what they're doing in the hood, kind of like how they're thinking and sort of like why they've made that conclusion. So I think from an enterprise perspective, these advanced reasoning models are particularly important. And then from an actual use case, I've got a bit of experience in kind of like healthcare and pharmaceuticals. So you can see kind of an example thought process that an LLM might go through here, which is kind of saying if gene X influences protein Y and protein Y influences tumor Z, then we might have like a novel candidate for a therapy here. And that's something we've not necessarily seen before too much, kind of being able to decipher multiple sources of information, deriving conclusions from that is particularly important. But again, I think the particular importance here is from an enterprise perspective, being able to know how the LLMs come to that decision is becoming more and more important as the AI adoption goes on, really. So the second one is kind of this focus on efficient deployments and inference. Obviously, we're seeing a big demand for more efficient and more sophisticated LLMs, but seeing a bigger demand for them to fit on less sophisticated computation and less sophisticated hardware. So for example, we saw a big increase at the start of the year with, obviously, you might have known DeepSeek R1, and that uses like obviously key techniques like mixture of extra architecture, which obviously kind of lights up only a number of parameters per inference. The reason it's doing that is so from an enterprise perspective, again, it can fit on even less sophisticated hardware and less GPU consumption. In the same tone, kind of like you see a big surge in these KV cache optimization techniques, where you're getting more KV cache like offloaded onto the CPU, again, reducing that GPU consumption, and again, a financial benefit to enterprises. And then other things like model distillation, which again was really popular in the DeepSeek set of models that are really kind of like reducing that model size and trying to squeeze out the same performance for not just smaller models, but kind of like models that fit on less sophisticated hardware again. A third one that I think is primarily driven by enterprises is this idea of very large context models. We at Civo are very proud to host the latest iteration of Llama models from Meta, so Llama 4. And I think the biggest thing that came out of that release last month was this really large context models with up to 10 million parameters for their Scout model. And I think what you're seeing, again, what I think is driven by enterprises is stakeholders like engineers are being able to put in huge wealths of data, which, as you can imagine, is very important for large companies. Putting big data into models and kind of bypassing this traditional RAG architecture that you see, where you usually have kind of a vector database, do vector comparisons and stuff. But it's making that process way more efficient and allowing the LLM to handle way more data. And then finally, I think kind of from a less technical note, we're seeing a big rise in autonomous coding agents. I think we're definitely seeing LLMs transform the way we code. I think we're seeing a huge surge in these vibe-coded projects, which regardless of your opinion on vibe coding, whether you think vibe coding should go into production environments, etc., regardless, it definitely kind of like amplifies the need for enterprises to get people from all backgrounds and all like job functions productive in the workday with AI. So you'll see that from kind of an example that I give later with Klein, which is an autonomous coding agent, but also these drag and drop workflows that are becoming ever more popular, things like NA10 and stuff. So another key concept I want to discuss, and another thing that we feel really passionately about here at Civo, is this idea of data privacy and sovereignty, specifically around AI. So again, like I said before, I think the need to be kind of compliant with AI is becoming even more important. I think regulation is becoming even more stringent, as you could all probably imagine. And so even though the adoption of AI is ever more important, the adoption of AI with these kind of abiding by kind of like the regulations and data sovereignty imposed by UK laws is ever more important, right? So I think essentially what I'm trying to get across is that there's an emphasis on sovereignty and privacy and not just using the most sophisticated models. But again, why does it matter for like you as an individual, but you as a small business and you as a large organization? So first of all, it's the potential business impact of not considering this as a key part of your development. And I think another very striking statistic, again from Gartner, shows that 60% of organizations will fall short of their ROI in 2027 simply from having a fragmented governance framework. I think that shows that kind of what good is the best model out there if it's non-compliant with UK law. I think the second one is, again, switching the kind of like persona a little bit, the impact on developer productivity. As I can imagine, there's a lot of developers here tonight. But from the Civo machine learning state of play analysis in 2024, we saw that 48% of developers actually report difficulties with ML deployments just due to kind of non-sovereign infrastructure. And I think abstracting kind of these concerns away from developers day to day is something that is going to free up the developers' time, making your company more productive and kind of like stress-free around data privacy and sovereignty. And finally, I think sovereignty and privacy is ever more important around this idea of a centralized or decentralized AI infrastructure. This is a really striking headline where obviously you would have seen kind of a lot of like negligence around data privacy, but We recently saw that things like the Italian government are fining OpenAI 50 million euros for poor practice around GDPR and user data. I think that's just an example of those guys processing user data with the incentive of future training of their closed source models. So I think decentralizing that, moving away from this vendor lock-in, and kind of having like local data storage is becoming ever more important for not just engineers, but large enterprises. But yeah, so building on that idea of kind of like decentralization, the final big thing that we feel really passionate about here at Civo and kind of influence our decision in developing relaxAI is this idea of AI democratization. What we're definitely seeing this year in 2025 and probably before is we're starting to see the gap close between open source model quality and the closed source models out there, things like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, etc., that you're probably aware of. We saw that just last month, Meta releasing Llama, and earlier in the year, DeepSeek R1 were just as comparable on the performance benchmarks against closed source LLMs that are quite high up there. The key difference being that there's no restrictions imposed by these AI hyperscalers, right? So if a service were to offer an open source model, allowing users to benefit from the most performant and newest LLMs, but the users didn't have that concern of kind of like working around data privacy, sovereignty, and like the statistic I showed before about ChatGPT unlawfully using kind of users' data to retrain their models. I think it'd be really valuable to enterprises. And so with that in mind, at Civo, we're kind of really proud to kind of have worked on this relaxAI product. So relaxAI is an AI assistant that prioritizes the privacy and sovereignty of your data. With relaxAI, your machine learning and data is run by Civo, a UK company. It's hosted in UK data centers. It will never cross foreign borders and will never be subject to foreign laws. Again, I think I've explained it enough by now, but this is obviously very important for large companies as more and more regulations get imposed around AI. Not just on the topic of data privacy and sovereignty, but in terms of performance, Relax hosts the latest iteration of Llama 4 models, so Maverick and Scout that you probably saw released last month. These are exceptional performance, really high up there in the LLM benchmarks, and they excel in tasks like conversational dialogue, reasoning, sentiment analysis, and code generation, and you'll see that in the demo later. But first of all, before the demo of Relax, I just want to go over a few of the key features that we're particularly proud of and we think are particularly valuable. So the first one, obviously, being from machine learning and LLM perspective, like I mentioned before, Relax hosts the latest iteration of the Llama 4 models. So there's two models, the Maverick model, which is on par with DeepSeek V3 for code generation. So really kind of like exceptional performance at complex coding tasks, which you can see is an obvious value for any developer out there. And then also the Scout model, which, like I mentioned before, this growing interest in very large context models. It has a 10 million token context length, which is absolutely massive. So, like I mentioned before, this push for things like putting an entire Git repository into the context of a model is something that's popular at the minute and allows you to kind of code alongside your AI agent. All of these are possible with Relax. So the second thing is the user interface. A very clear and simple layout and design. It allows you to obviously interact with the machine learning model, but it also lets you do things like add and remove API keys, manage the members of your organization, and give people access to your project. It allows you to upload files for summarization or several files. And it also comes with built-in tools like web search, right? So anything that you need after the knowledge cutoff of the model for the Llama 4, it's August 2024. You can use web search to do things like literature reviews. You can create citations, so you can click on them and do more reading as you wish. So it's exceptional at kind of like compressing and analyzing a wealth of information. On the same tone, we're really proud to have kind of a really flexible and reliable API functionality. So as I'll show you later, the API comes with really clear, consistent, and easy to follow documentation to get you guys set up. Building on the clarity of the documentation, we set the API up in a way to have one-to-one compatibility with the OpenAI API client. So the reason we did that is because it's very, very simple for you guys to migrate your pre-existing workloads away from ChatGPT and OpenAI, away from like a vendor lock-in, the hyperscalers of AI, and transition over to Relax. It's a very simple job to migrate. And finally, we also here at Civo and here at like working on the Relax product, acknowledge the benefit of working with these like integration tools, like out-of-the-box AI tools, things like Klein, like I'll show later. But I think they're becoming more and more popular. Like the point I made before, getting everyone in your company more productive with AI is very important. And I think these drag and drop workflows are becoming more important. So in our documentation, you'll see 20 plus integrations, well documented, allowing you to follow along and kind of get up and running with Relax very easily. So if I can get the monitor correct, I'll do a live demo. So as I mentioned, we have both UI and API functionality. So briefly going on to kind of like the user interface of Relax. So it comes with, I'm going to try and copy and paste some prompts with one hand is particularly difficult, obviously. So with like web search turned off and just simply using the LLM, you can see it's able to summarize historical events, probably nothing too exciting you've seen, but what's interesting is kind of like the speed that Relax operates at. So things like time to first token and the tokens per second is exceptionally high on the benchmarks, like I talked about before, because it's driven by some of Meta's most powerful models, right? Again, do a one-hand copy and paste, just to show you the use of AI with code generation. So write me a Python script to benchmark my LLM. You see Relax kicks into gear straight away and gives you some really useful code, which is easy to copy and paste into your IDE. Finally, with web search. So if you've got some queries about live data, say you want to kind of like analyze the news today, or anything the knowledge cut off from the model, we have web search enabled. And so you can use it, say, if you're from an academic background, scientific research background, or you're just doing research. I think what's particularly useful for even when I'm doing research is Relax will give you the URLs as well and citations, so it's really good for kind of like literature reviews. Let's give a really comprehensive report on machine learning. So that's the UI. That's what I kind of like wanted to review. And then the other part of the coin, obviously, is the API access that comes with Relax as well. I'll briefly go to our documentation for the API. Like I mentioned, we're really proud of our documentation just because it's really easy to follow. We offer one-to-one compatibility with the OpenAI client, allowing you to easily migrate your workloads. As you can see here, but this is what we're particularly proud of. So we offer a wealth of documentation on how to use integrations. Today, I'm going to be using Klein. So you can see these are just some steps to get up and running with whether it's a drag and drop workflow or whether it's an autonomous coding agent, whatever you guys feel fits. But I'm going to be using Klein today. Let's flick to VS Code. So what is Klein? Klein is a LLM-driven AI coding agent that plugs into VS Code. Driven by any LLM of your choice. Today we're going to be using Relax, obviously. And specifically, we're going to be using the Maverick model. As you can see here, we put in a relax endpoint API key and specified that we want to use Maverick, right? So here we are, and I'm going to give it a prompt, which basically says something very simple. Write me a website and invite people to my birthday, and then do some extra functionality. The key part that I want to show you guys is to make to fill in all the gaps, right? So not only have I asked it to do that, I've asked it to make it into a Kubernetes deployment. I've asked it to make me a load balancer and also build a multi-platform Docker image. And here's my Docker username. Obviously, the traditional LLMs, when you go onto the user interface, aren't capable of doing that because they can't kind of like code alongside you. So straight away, you can see relax is kind of like giving the reasoning behind what it's doing. And then again, further to my point earlier about getting everyone up and running with relax and productive, I'm not really going to do anything. I'm literally just going to click the button over and over again, and you'll see it kicks in, it writes me all my code. There you go. It's not exactly slow. It's going to probably create me a Docker file and a Kubernetes deployment. This is a client issue. There we go. Go. There you go. There's your file. And finally, we're probably just expecting a Kubernetes deployment. There's your Docker build file. And you can see it runs all the commands from the terminal as well. It's not exactly slow, so I basically just end-to-end coded a website. It's not exactly functional, but kind of to demonstrate the point in literally about 1 minute, right? There's your Docker image built. I think client is going to play ball. Try it one more time. If not, I've got a example of this in practice. There you go. It's detecting issues with the Docker build. So once that's built, it's going to go to give you a Kubernetes deployment. And then if we grab this DNS, provided the pod's still up, it gave me something like this. So not exactly functional, but I think it basically demonstrates that with these plugin tools and autonomous coding agents, you can basically set up what you want very quickly. There it is. It's give you my Kubernetes deployment that I just need to deploy to get the website up and running. So what I'm trying to demonstrate there is you can use relax for any project that you might want with these kind of like out-of-the-box tools, use the user interface or use the API for anything that you might need to do your business. But yeah, I think that is it from me. Got any questions? I'll be happy to help. So we've got like sign-up page for Relax and also the API documentation if you want to take a closer look at that.
Does anybody have any questions there?
There you go at the front.
So you mentioned that the model is trained from Lambda, right? And to me, it looked like it was very similar to ChatGPT, like the interface and everything.
Right.
So what does this actually do differently to ChatGPT, and why would someone use this over? Because there's already loads of different, AIs that people can use. So why would they move from ChatGPT if they're already used?
Yeah, really good question. I don't think that's necessarily what at Civo we're trying to promote, right? We're obviously proud of our functionality, we're proud of the kind of the model performance and how it plugs into different integrations, etc. But I think the main point is with ChatGPT, as I said before, you don't get the added perks of things like data privacy and sovereignty, and that's kind of one of the core messages of our model. I think if you kind of go home and do your research, and I tried to kind of like paint the picture tonight, but I think there's a lot of use cases of negligence around data privacy and sovereignty and compliance with ChatGPT and OpenAI. I think there's been data breaches, and I think what enterprises are starting to do, large companies start to move away from that centralized AI infrastructure model and to kind of moving towards these open source models. So I think relax's key selling point here is not necessarily the performance of the model, although it does use Llama 4, which is exceptionally very, very performant. But it's actually around this premise of we will never keep your data. The data will always stay within the UK. It will never cross UK borders. It will never be subject to foreign laws. And I think that's where we get a lot of interest. Anyway, yeah.
So just to add, that was my question too. So you are a wrapper around like Llama models, and if I were to, so you're like hosting those models.
Right. Yeah.
So if I were to use anything to host a Llama model, and how would it be different from using the Relax? You said performance is not the thing, so, and the output is also similar. So like, I'm sorry, it's a hosting service, or like how do you provide data privacy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so if you were going to kind of like host your own model, you wouldn't get the added perks of like user interface. You wouldn't get the added perks of having like one-to-one compatibility with the OpenAI client, which is kind of like consistent with our documentation, and kind of like all the functionality that you can kind of like use within your organization, right? So being able to add and remove people from your organization and use it as a collective company is really where we're trying to target at, right? So if you were, say, to use VLM to host your own machine learning model on NVIDIA H100 GPUs, could you use that in production across your company? I think that's a good point, but I think you don't get all the added benefits. Yeah, I think if you want more in-depth kind of explanation, we're happy to have a discussion later around all the features, some leaflets around if you want to do some extra reading. Yeah, good, thanks.
Time for one more question at the back. Regarding the privacy and data sovereignty, I understand if the model is hosted on a cloud, the part of the tools and queries, the models can objectively make a query and Google with sensitive information where that can be compromised, right?
Yeah, good question. So again, like for more information around kind of like storage of your data specifically, happy to help after. From an AI perspective, like an AI infrastructure perspective, an engineer's perspective, we use things like VLM, which have kind of like these tools in place to protect your data privacy anyway. The data never comes out of the model. We don't store your data. So yeah, we're in charge of that process. So we never kind of like let your data leave our data centers, which are situated in the UK. So I think the key part is that will always be subject to UK laws, and we abide by those laws and we comply by those laws. That's not an issue for kind of you to take care of, and that's a benefit for an organization in particular to kind of like take advantage of.